Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through our top 10 Dynasty IDP sleepers post-NFL draft.
Hike!
In this episode, we made a consensus top list. Joe and I are going to be going back and forth, alternating between these 10 guys who we think could be the next rising stars. Some of them you may have heard before, but they're coming back, and those who have not yet come on the scene to become that star. So, Joe, who's the first guy we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, first guy we're going to be talking about is defensive end Haason Reddick, now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And speaking of guys that we've heard of before, Steve, this is definitely one of those guys. And, I think the fact that he was able to be with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, really good for him, getting to be opposite of Yaya Diaby. Really think it just fortifies that edge rusher position. It's something I feel like Yaya Diaby needed the help. Feel like with him on the other side, it's one of the better situations he could have gone to. And look, I know last year there was a whole contract debacle with the Jets, just had a lot of issues. It didn't really end up working out because he didn't get a full training camp in there. His stats suffered, but if you just look at what he was able to do, 2023 with the Eagles, the fact that he had 11 sacks. In 2022, he had 16 sacks as well. And with Todd Bowles being the head coach, really think it's I think Reddick set up with that defense and Bowles as the head coach to really have a rebound this year.
Yeah, and we felt like he was worthy of this list because a lot of people probably felt like he was just left for dead when it came to the whole Jets situation. And would anybody even want to consider him? I think he just has been forgotten. But like you said, Joe, he has a strong pedigree prior to this whole debacle with the New York Jets. Double-digit sacks for those 4 years. You can't say that about a lot of players. And not to mention here, this is an interesting wrinkle in all this. And sometimes we always look at this from a salary cap, financial perspective, because that's what we're all about here at Front Office Pros. But Haason Reddick was given a 1-year, $14 million contract. You remember how much of that was guaranteed, Joe?
I don't.
Putting you on the spot here. $12 million. So 12 out of the $14 million is guaranteed. Now, just goes to show, Gabe Davis got cut, and they're eating $12 million. So it doesn't mean if they want to move off him, a team can move off him. But they gave him a chunk of change. That makes me feel like, especially with Todd Bowles as the head coach, they're going to have a plan. Reddick could have went anywhere. Yes, he could be chasing the money. He did want a new contract, but ultimately, I would think he wants to, hey, this is who I am again. And I think he's going to have that opportunity in Tampa.
Yeah, I definitely think he's going to be, to your point, I think he's going to be hungry to kind of show people who he is again and return to that player that we saw get those double-digit sacks in Philadelphia.
And we're going to be talking about a lot of deep players here. This guy isn't as deep, but he's a guy that he might be forgotten. I don't think a lot of people are going to be looking for him, and I think you could probably either get him late. Maybe he's a free agent out there. You could be able to go get him, or you could go trade for him, and it won't be that much to get him.
Yeah, I definitely think, he definitely could be forgotten. 1 year of, just not being relevant, and just I feel like probably, in dynasty leagues, probably leaving a bad taste in our mouths with just the poor season as well. So I do think there is a chance that you could go, he'd be available for you.
So the second player we're going to be talking about here is edge rusher, defensive end, Dayo Odeyingbo, who is now with the Chicago Bears. He's a guy we talked about recently in our top 10 IDP sleepers prior to the draft, and he's made it again for this edition. He made it. He made it past the draft because the Bears didn't really address the position. You've got Montez Sweat there. You got some interior pass rush with Gervin Dexter and Grady Jarrett now, formerly with the Atlanta Falcons. And when you look at a guy like Dayo Odeyingbo, it's interesting when you look at next-gen stats, he led the Colts with 50 quarterback pressures, and he's only one of just 6 players with 30-plus QB hits in fewer than 20 starts over the past 2 years. That was a nugget that Todd Pelissero had talked about that said that, hey, this guy's going to get a decent amount of money, get ready. And he wasn't kidding. That's why these insiders, when they have an idea of what's going on, they're not joking around. He got a 3-year, $48 million contract with $32 million guaranteed. So he's shown a lot of promise. when he first came in the league, he was hampered by an injury, caused him to fall. And so going forward now, it's a great opportunity with the Bears where they've got probably, one of their better defensive lines in a long time, Joe. And I think we both feel that he could have this opportunity this year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really like his situation a lot better in Chicago than I did with the Indianapolis Colts. Being able to play alongside, be on opposite side of Montez Sweat, I think really helps as well. They've built up the interior defensive line as well. So I'm excited to see what Dayo could potentially do with Chicago, even though he's probably not a guy that's been on a lot of people's radars.
So who do we got for number 3, Joe?
Yeah, number 3, we're going linebacker position with Akeem Davis-Gaither with the Arizona Cardinals. And, they didn't really address the linebacker position either. They did take Cody Simon, but if you paid attention to our last video, you'll know Steve pointed out the fact that looking to possibly just start off as a special teamer. He's got the instincts and the smarts to be able to do that. So Akeem Davis-Gaither setting up to be the starting middle linebacker for the Cardinals, and Kaiser White is no longer, and he leaves behind, the opportunity with 137 tackles White had last year, 2.5 sacks, and an interception. So I think it's a great opportunity for Gaither to step right in and possibly do as well as White did last year.
Yeah, we got to see him in more of an expanded role with the Cincinnati Bengals just due to some injuries last year. I mean, he really has been primarily a special teams player. He's been in the league for 5 years, and he really hasn't done all that much. He was a 4th-round pick out of Appalachian State. Even I would have been able to tell you that. And I typically know where people went. But it was interestingly enough in his last game as a Bengal at Pittsburgh, he had 8 solo tackles and 4 assisted with a tackle for loss. Really showed out against that game against Pittsburgh. And like you said, I just think with linebackers, the opportunity is ripe. And I'm not so concerned that he really didn't do anything, because we've seen linebackers who are primarily special teams guys, when they get the opportunity, we talked about it in our most recent episode, even talking about a guy like Zach Bond. He's not Zach Bond. But to say that there are players like him, that just rise out of the ashes, and they said they had no prior real starting experience and not the stats to show for it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, for IDP, the main thing we can ask for is just the simple fact of having the opportunity, and he certainly does have it with the Arizona Cardinals.
All right, so for number 4, we're going to be talking about another linebacker, and Joe, I got to tell you, I have stuck my neck out on the line for this guy too often at times, and this might be the last time that and you, I guess, are doing it with me here, that we're pounding the table for this guy, and we hope it works out, and that's going to be linebacker Devin White of now the Las Vegas Raiders. He has had a rough past 2 years. With the Buccaneers, at one point, I mean, he was really at the pinnacle of his career, the top, 5 linebacker. Obviously was taken 5th overall in the 2019 draft by the Bucs, which you don't typically see that for an inside linebacker, but he just fell off a cliff, primarily because he wanted this huge contract. The Bucs weren't going to give it to him. Things got disgruntled between him and Todd Bowles, ended up eventually benching him. And then it was like, okay, where is he going to go? He signs with Philadelphia. That doesn't work out. He gets cut. And then he goes and plays for the Houston Texans. And he just kind of gets moved around, from place to. He played for one other team too, I think, right? It was Eagles, and then he played for one other team too, besides the Texans, if I'm not mistaken.
If he did, I'm not sure what team. Eagles and Texans are the ones that I remember.
Well, anyways, so you might say, why would you ever think that he even has a comeback? Am I just holding on for dear life, hoping that some type of value happens? Well, you may be right about that, because I have a huge contract with him, and I'm biased about this. But what's encouraging about it is that he goes to a team in Las Vegas that did not address the linebacker position. They left Bobby Spillane. I believe they drafted a linebacker in the 7th round. We're not concerned about that. Devine Diablo also left. So now it's Devin White and Landon Roberts. And we thought about talking about Landon Roberts, and we had talked about him in the past. But looking at the stats here, I mean, it's not even close. I mean, Devin White has had, back in 2020, he had 140 total tackles and 9 sacks. I mean, Landon Roberts hasn't even gotten even near close to that type of stat level. And what's very helpful is that Tom Brady has a huge influence in that organization now with the Raiders as a minority owner. And the new GM of the Las Vegas Raiders, John Spytek, was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He said that when he was at Tampa, as far as the playoff run with the Buccaneers when they won their Super Bowl, he said Devin White, he hasn't seen somebody like him dominate. So you're talking about a front office and an ownership group that's going to have their support behind Devin White. This might be the opportunity that Devin White's been looking for to really resurrect his career.
Yeah, I think it is. And it's interesting because this guy was a dominant linebacker, and it wasn't all that long ago that he was a dominant linebacker and one of the top linebackers, for Dynasty and even IDP for that matter. So, and I think with the opportunity that he has, he does a lot more things. And I think he's got a lot more upside than Landon Roberts does. I mean, Landon Roberts is mainly just a guy that's good at tackling and playing the run well. But Devin White can just do a lot more things between rushing the passer. Always was a good coverage guy. Be curious to see if he still is that player in terms of like the coverage and everything. But he just can do a lot more things than Landon Roberts, and that's why he's a more interesting player, and that's why we have him on here over Roberts for that matter.
I feel like that's one of the reasons why he kind of dwindled was they felt like his coverage ability was getting worse and worse. He was only going to be a one, kind of a 2-down linebacker.
Yeah, but
from what I recall.
Yeah, that was the thing. But like Landon Roberts certainly can't cover. I mean, he's just a run stopper. So unless they
see ball, get ball type of guy.
Exactly. I mean, unless they're taking both of them off and just loading up with DBs, I think Devin White could be the guy in coverage here.
I don't have any specific examples off the top of my head, but I do think time and time again you do see these situations. But let's talk about Reddick, right? A guy who just disappeared. Sometimes it just takes the right situation and the right environment that allows these guys to exceed. And I think this is a similar situation. White has been trying to find that spot. And like you said, if he doesn't make it here, he's done. Like I no more. Right. Like I'm not gonna be counting on this guy any longer. Like I'm not. It's over. But with Spytek in there, with Tom Brady in there, with the opportunity there, with no other linebacker really there outside of Landon Roberts, this is his job for the taking. This is his opportunity to reclaim, his status as a premier linebacker. And who knows if he'll ever get there, but at least he'll be at least decent where he's actually a starter again.
Yeah, at the very least, he should be decent and, a potential starter. And it just goes to show you, like, I think his issue, like you mentioned, was with Todd Bowles, because obviously, Spytek, the former GM with the Buccaneers, still holds him in high respect and, wanted to make sure that they went ahead and added Devin White to the team.
Yeah, well, let's not forget with Bobby Spillane leaving the Raiders, he had a total of 158 tackles last year total with 91 solos. So he's leaving that behind. So great opportunity ahead. But why don't we head over to number 5, Joe? Who do we got there?
All right. So at number 5, we're going to the defensive tackle position, going with Jer'Zhan Newton of the Washington Commanders. And if you've been following along with us here during this offseason, Jer'Zhan Newton is a guy that Steve and I are both excited about, even dating back to last year in the draft process as well. And, Jonathan Allen is no longer part of the Commanders defense, paving the way for additional playing time here for Newton, as Washington likes to rotate guys in and out. Right now they list Javon Kinlaw ahead of him in the depth chart, but, we're not really concerned about him. And, Newton's coming off of a pretty decent rookie year. He had 44 total tackles, 19 solo, and also a couple of sacks. And that's what's the interesting part is, his sack upside that he does bring, and hopefully he's able to add more sacks this year.
Well, the thing too is, remember he missed some time in the beginning of the year with that Jones fracture in his foot, and when you have a foot injury, even though he was able to rehab and play, that could impact your get off as a defensive tackle, and the amount of these guys are not thin, right? There's a lot of weight being put on that body, so I think at the end of the day, with Jonathan Allen leaving, Deron Payne's been kind of underwhelming since that 1 year. it really will allow Newton, I think, to really step up and become that guy. It's hard to see defensive tackles make that, make an immediate impact, but he's a guy who maybe in year two he starts to make that jump. I think we're both willing to take that bet. For a guy who's really not a household name, a guy who was going to be a first-round pick, I think the injury status made him slide. And then because he was injured, I think he wasn't as memorable. His rookie year wasn't as memorable. But I think don't sleep on this guy. I think he could really – if we know year three is usually when we start to see these defensive tackles really take off. So we may be a year early on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does put it all together.
Yeah. I mean, it's still, even if we are a year early, now is still the time to go ahead and get him. Because, I mean, with him having a fully healthy offseason here this year, and if his numbers do jump up quite a bit with the additional opportunity as well from his rookie season, if you try to go get him next year before the big breakout, his price is going to be a lot higher than it is right now.
So for the next player we're going to be talking about here, at number 6, it's going to be safety Cole Bishop of the Buffalo Bills. Another guy who dealt with some injuries as well. Back in your training camp, he had a scapular fracture in his shoulder, missed a few weeks there. And I think for these young players, training camp is huge. Really gives them the opportunity to understand the playbook, have that practice time. And I think both of them, Bishop and Newton, who we just talked about, that definitely impacted that stunted their growth, is what I should say. But you look at that safety room, Taylor Rapp's a guy, when he is on the field and he is healthy, you can see he makes an impact. And then you've got DeMar Hamlin, who obviously amazing story, but as a Bills fan, I can attest, and probably others could as well, he's not the best football player. So as a result, I think this is an opportunity where Cole Bishop can really step in as a starting safety. They didn't address it in the draft. So I think that, they really believe that he can step it up, and as he should. He was a second-round pick. You don't take a guy like that at early and not expect him to be a starter. They'd say, like, hey, if you can get 3 or 4 solid starters in this in a draft class, you're doing pretty good. And your first and second rounders should be ones that your hit rate should be even higher because they're higher pedigree of players. They should be starters out there. And so I think hopefully he's able to stay healthy during the training camp and the off-season program, but I would fully suspect that he's going to be that starting safety week 1 heading into the season.
Yeah, I would think so as well, barring them adding a veteran player in here late during training camp or whatever. But like you said, you don't take guys in the first and second round and not have them at least by their second year fully contributing as a starter. And, the Bills defense, we've seen plenty of safeties. It's always a good spot for, IDP, as that with the system that they run, the safeties produce a decent amount. I mean, Jordan Poyer was always a guy that was coveted in IDP, and then Taylor Rapp even had his moments as well. So if Bishop is in fact the starter as we would expect, definitely think this year could be good for him.
Well, and two, it's not like there's been a regime change. It'd be a little bit different if you're
Right.
a second or first round pick. Now you have a new head coach, you have a new GM. The Bills front office has been one of the most stable, that we've seen in the past, however many years, which is saying something for the Bills. Why don't we head over to number 7, Joe? Who do you got there?
Yeah, number 7, we're going with cornerback Terrion Arnold of the Detroit Lions. Coming into his second year, was a former first-round draft pick in last year's draft. Honestly, Steve, I was surprised that he didn't have an interception last year, despite, I think teams were picking on him quite a bit. He was a guy that struggled in coverage with the penalties. He had a lot of pass interference calls on him, but they suffered a lot of injuries in the secondary, which didn't help him in his rookie year. But they go ahead and sign DJ Reed in free agency and have him playing alongside. So I definitely think that will help him heading into his second year. And he, again, should get plenty of targets against him, and hopefully he's able to get his hands on a ball this year.
Well, even though he didn't have interceptions, though, I do think it's encouraging to see those 10 pass deflections. In our league, we heavily weight pass deflections, and to see that many pass deflections, to me, that's a good sign. Also had 60 combined tackles, which I think is also a pretty high number. We always look at it when it comes to corner, which is a very difficult position to evaluate, probably the hardest. But when you have a really good corner on the opposite side, you don't have an island situation where we're just going to avoid that player altogether. So with DJ Reed coming in, he's no all-star, but he's definitely been good enough. And we've seen how that's affected even a guy like Sauce Gardner. So although Sauce didn't have that great of a year, but, somewhat of a different situation. Let's not get down that rabbit hole. But you know what I'm saying. And I think we both believe Terrion Arnold could have it. And not to mention, let's think about this too. Lions didn't really address the defensive line. I mean, they got Tyleik Williams, who's more of that run-stuffing defender. But they don't have, other than Aiden Hutchinson, they don't really have an elite pass rusher. So as a result, if they have more time to throw, that means less sacks, more balls out, more opportunities for him either to get pass deflections, picks, tackles, you name it. So I think, and honestly, if you look at and it's early yet, and you have people on social media that they want to jump on a story quick, but there are even some that are kind of saying like Aiden Hutchinson doesn't look all that great as far as his rehab goes. He's not, when he's trying to run at full speed, it doesn't look like he's, the guy that they say he's looking at before. Now, it could be early, but if that is true, I mean, it was a pretty gruesome injury. And if he's not his former self, that would be interesting to see how that affects things.
Yeah, I guess I was interested in the fact that they didn't really address an additional edge rusher to help out Aiden Hutchinson. But as far as people saying that, it's not like Aiden Hutchinson's a guy that really relies on his speed. He's just a guy that's a high motor player and is able to use his hands and get around guys. So I'm not really.
Yeah, I know.
particularly
Yeah,
worried
you're
about
Jeep Wrangler, Joe. I know. You're
Yeah.
Old Faithful over there. I know. Well, let's talk about number 8. And it's a guy who came on the scene early on in his career, and then he kind of just fell off. And that's Azeez Ojulari, now of the Philadelphia Eagles, formerly with the New York Giants. He came off real hot in the beginning, having 49 combined tackles and 8 sacks. After that, after his rookie year, he just wasn't able to stay on the field. But he's shown flashes, and even last year he had 6 sacks. If you look at the Philadelphia Eagles depth chart, Joe, it's pretty lackluster. They, by all accounts, they basically swung and whiffed on Bryce Huff. Howie Roseman's a great GM, but none of them are perfect. And that one's where it was like, what happened there? Because we thought he could, he showed a lot of, upside in New York. I didn't think he was all that good to begin with. But after what happened there, it's like, oof. Then they got Nolan Smith, he did show some flashes that he's starting to come on. But I think he had with a triceps or a bicep injury that he's going to be, rehabbing from based on the playoffs. And then after that, they don't really have any edge rushers, which is so interesting. You think about the Eagles and having this stout defense, but they've got Joshua Uche. Okay. He's never really proven it. They have Jalix Hunt, who I know you're probably really excited about. A guy who you drafted late as a flyer, kind of a project type edge rusher, but maybe he has a crack at the starting job. They don't have a premier pass rusher.
Yeah, no, they definitely don't. So I do think it is Azeez Ojulari. Could be interesting. Playing with a lot better defensive line. Should have a lot of increased opportunity. Giants were with Thibodeau, Brian Burns last year, pretty crowded room. So definitely will be curious to see how he rebounds with the Eagles here.
All right, Joe, who do we got for number 9?
At number 9, we're going to go with safety Jaden Hicks of the Kansas City Chiefs. And this guy, it is interesting. I think you and I both would have thought that the Chiefs potentially would have addressed the position in the draft, but they decided not to. So it looks like he's going to be the starting strong safety. Brian Cook will be the free safety. So I think out of the two, I'd rather have Hicks at being that strong safety. Typically, they're a lot closer to the ball, get the box snaps. And we've just seen, the Chiefs safeties do pretty well. Tyrann Mathieu, then they had Reed last year. He's moving on, ironically enough. He goes to the Saints, kind of the similar path that Tyrann Mathieu had there. So this should be Hicks' jobs moving forward, and it'll be interesting to see how he does.
Yeah, a lot of AK tackles left behind, right? 87 combined tackles that Justin Reed had with the Chiefs. And he honestly started turning it on the past 2 years. Somewhat of a disappointment in his first year, but started to pick it up, as the safety for the Chiefs. So he's a guy who I think a lot of people were surprised that he went as late as he did in the draft. And there was a lot of buzz surrounding him. He just didn't get the playing time. But that's how it works sometimes. These guys don't, especially on defense, don't expect that these guys automatically get the starting job. And don't just sell them off just because they didn't. It takes a while sometimes for these guys to really get a shot and really develop. I think he's one of those guys that, like you said, could have a real opportunity.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. Right now, I mean, they do have Mike Edwards listed behind him on the depth chart, but he's slated there for the starter. And if he truly is a starter, he's very interesting and a guy I'd be interested in having in Dynasty here.
Well, he was a guy even too that we had talked about that, our last time we talked about Dynasty IDP sleepers. He's one of those guys we identified, and because the Chiefs didn't really address the position, he's still here. All right, so our last player we're going to be talking about, number 10, is going to be cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry of the New Orleans Saints. He now has an opportunity to be thrust in the starting role with Haason Reddick now leaving in free agency and heading over to the New York Giants. You got Alontae Taylor there, who has shown to be a really good player for the Saints. And so we think McKinstry, I mean, this defense is not very good. Their defensive line, they don't really have a lot to work with. I think that the Saints could get carved up pretty good. Now, whether McKinstry is actually a really good player or not, it's really hard to know sometimes when it comes to the Saints. And if you're too good, sometimes you're not relevant in fantasy. So I think he could get a lot of targets this year. I know you do too, which ultimately we feel, allows him to have more opportunities and really will make him a sleeper.
Yeah, 100%. I think he will get the opportunities. I mean, he hasn't yet really had the opportunity, I feel like, to establish himself like as a shutdown corner, a guy that you shouldn't pass against. And Alontae Taylor, he's been performing pretty well over the last couple of years. So I would think teams are going to want to stay away from him. And where, like you said, McKinstry should get a lot of targets and then a lot of opportunities to make plays on the ball and earn points for IDP leagues.
The only thing that could stop him is you did have a regime change, even though you still, I mean, again, what are the Saints doing? I mean, they might be honestly the worst run organization in football, even worse than the Browns. If I were any advisor to the family that owns the Saints, I would tell them to get Mickey Loomis out of there immediately. I don't know why he still has a job. You should be thanking your lucky stars that he hasn't left and Sean Payton hasn't decided to bring him along, because I don't know what they're seeing in Mickey Loomis.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show how much pull Sean Payton had, with Mickey Loomis, and their drafts were, I feel like, a lot better when Sean Payton was there and getting the talent, and just hasn't been the same since he hasn't been there.
No, it hasn't. But so that's the only. So he was there, but obviously the GM identifies and drafts players that ultimately will support the coaching staff, and it's a new coaching staff. So who knows? He's going to have to prove himself. But with Adebo leaving, we'd be both surprised if he's not the starter.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would definitely think he's got to be the starter. I mean, right now they've got a guy like Isaac Yiadom behind him, who's just been a complete journeyman after the Broncos drafted him. And, like Marshawn Lattimore getting traded last year as well. It's really Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry out there in outside corner.
So that does it for this episode. We went through our top 10 IDP sleepers post-NFL draft. You need to know about these guys. It's not a guarantee that any of these go off, but what is a guarantee these days? These are guys that have some real opportunities ahead of them, and we think they could really come on the scene, whether they become the next stars of their position or they're guys who are reprising their roles that have forgotten. Don't forget about them for you, though. We're bringing them to your attention. If you haven't done so already, check out our most recent episode where we did the same thing, but for the offensive side. We went through our Dynasty sleepers post-NFL draft that we think that you need to know. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.